So this is an after poem, meaning inspired by, in conversation with another iconic poet, Martin Espada. So this is after him. This is the year that every black girl on the block lets their hair out to speak with the sun, and the concrete sings a gospel tune with two swinging ropes on beat. This is the year that empty dining tables in every South Bronx apartment shall have the grandest feast, be the first supper, like turning water into wine. This is the year that there is no water leaking from the ceiling, where faucets run clear in Flint, and sunken kin rise from the ocean, sending a wave of revival crashing on shore. This is the year that precincts are replaced with basketball courts and community centers. Wailing sirens are obsolete, and those who left empty spaces on the block filled by only their memory make their grandest return. The OGs replenish the block with their rejoice of freedom, and every cell in Rikers whistles an empty wind. This is the year that pavement gardens grow to more than a rose, when the concrete jungle becomes a rainforest where we let the community fire hydrant flow like we do every year anyway, this time with more to be celebrated and more flowers to let bloom. This is the year that mama calls off job 1 and 2, props her burning feet and chemical wrinkling hands up on the couch, and no tears drop from her eyes from the scorch of cleaning someone else's home to survive. This is the year that there are no gunshots, no brutal cop, no sixth-floor mother watching with her palms clasping each other, sending silent prayers to whoever's baby that may be. There will be no body on the ground and no funeral the following weekend. This is the year that the Bronx is not on fire, where we sit on castle thrones instead of piles of rubble, and charred insurance money vanishes from the hands of slumlords. This is the year that the Whole Foods on 125th Street turns into a jazz club, where we call for a second Harlem Renaissance and our hum tunes of liberty are sent into the air. This is the year that every school has every notebook, every pencil, every brand name crayon box waiting on brand new desks, every mirror teacher and the textbooks trace stories to the other side of the middle passage, speaking the names of Assata Shakur and Harriet Tubman. This is the year that cramped public housing apartments are renovated into mansions, and property owners and gentrifiers are locked out at the gate. If the handed meals of our youth began with the idea that none of us should know hunger better than we know ourselves, then this is the year. If rebellions were crafted by the exhaust of worn souls and the heat of whipped backs who refused to take another, then this is the year. So may every disempowered soul, with wrists all bruised and blistered, claim their existence to be righteous and take their freedom into their own hands. Thank you.
Stephanie Pacheco, everybody. Yes! Yes! Come on! Amazing! Wow. Yeah, you deserve all that applause and more, Stephanie. Stephanie represents Urban Word, which is how I came up through poetry as well. If you have any young ones who are interested in writing and reading, Urban Word is a great organization to go through. You can talk to me, Stephanie, or Chanel over there if you're interested. But let's welcome the rest of our panelists, Raquel Willis and Lucy Yu, and our moderator, Brittany Barker.
Thank you.
How is everybody doing today? It's a good day. It's a good day to be alive. I'm happy y'all are here, and I'm happy to share this conversation with the lovely panelists. Yes. Can we give them some energy, please? Yes. Yes. So I'm Brittany Barker, poet and educator. Today our conversation is about writing the future of NYC, just thinking about the ways that we can use our writing and our community organizing to build inclusive and equitable spaces in this city that we all occupy. And we're here to learn from these lovely people on this panel. So just introducing again, Stephanie, wonderful youth poet laureate. And the lovely Raquel Willis. Yes. And Lucy Yu. All right, we're gonna make this a living room conversation, okay? So just kick your feet up and let's get comfortable. So I just wanna start with the first question, which is, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you came into writing and community organizing. Anyone can start.
I can start. Hi, everyone. Happy Saturday, also. We love literary folk here on a Saturday. My name's Lucy Yu. I'm the owner of You and Me Books. It's the first female Asian American bookstore in New York City. Thank you. I've had a long-term relationship with books, but I was never in the literary world, and I decided to open up this business in December of 2021.
Wow, yeah. Big.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. I'm Raquel Willis. I am a Black trans activist, soon-to-be author from the South. And, you know, it's been a winding road, I guess, kind of straddling storytelling and social justice, but I studied journalism, went to J school, heard all that stuff about objectivity and not being my brilliant Black queer self fully. And really when the movement for Black lives started to pop off and so many new conversations happened, community organizing kind of stole my heart. And so now my work is mixing that all together.
So I got into writing through organizing. I had dabbled in writing, you know, for the occasional school assignment. But it wasn't until I was in high school and I started getting involved in heavy organizing work for educational justice, for social, racial justice, with all of those intersectionalities. I started advocating for students, for members of my community, and through that, it was so clear that I needed to share my story, you know, that my story was important to the conversations that we were having. And with that, I realized very quickly that the best way for me to connect with the audiences that I was in front of was through poetry. Mm-hmm. So I started writing and performing poetry. My paths led me to urban word, and now we are here.
And we're happy you're here. We're happy you all are here. Thank y'all for sharing. Raquel, I wanted to start with you. I know that you've done amazing work for marginalized communities, but specifically for Black trans folk, including the huge protest that you led at the Brooklyn Museum. So I wanted to hear more about how your life experiences has inspired your activism today.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a big question. You know, I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, and I was very isolated from LGBTQ plus community, but I think also just kind of understanding the threads of social justice in my own life and how systems of oppression were impacting who I was becoming. And I think what I found was I had a very kind of insular or isolated experience as a Black trans woman in kind of a collegiate setting when I was at the University of Georgia. And so when I graduated, I really didn't have Black trans community. I had a lot of white trans community, a lot of white queer community, but that wasn't the same. Mm-hmm. And so in my first job, I was a news reporter in Monroe, Georgia, even smaller than the other towns I've named. And I was living what we call stealth in trans community. So I wasn't out as being queer or out as being trans. And I felt so, I guess, dehydrated in that experience. You know, it was like there was a wilting that was happening away from my experience as a trans woman. And it was really the death by suicide of Leela Alcorn, a 14-year-old girl, trans girl in 2014, that really pushed me to be like, oh, I have all of these privileges, and I'm not doing anything to really kind of shift the terrain for other trans folks, or even just kind of being a part of that larger fabric. So that was really the impetus for me to get more involved with community. I found and was radicalized by Black trans folks in Atlanta. One of my dear friends, Toni Michelle Williams, is the ED of Solutions Not Punishments Collaborative down there, which is a Black trans-led abolitionist organization. And that really kind of firmly rooted me in this call to social justice and how the work that I was doing in media and storytelling could be a part of that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's always interesting too, like when you have to create the community that you have to create the spaces that you need for yourself. So thank you for doing that work. And I know that it's not easy and trial and error, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. You know, especially in the early days of the movement for Black Lives, there was such an idea of what activism looked like, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we have this idea that organizing and activism often only looks like the kind of direct action we see in images or on TV of the person with the bullhorn in the streets. And that's not the only type of organizing out there at all, right? Oftentimes that's just kind of the spark for other work that can be happening in all the institutions that we navigate in. And so it took me a long time to kind of own that stories are organizing tools. Like that is, you know, people talk about changing hearts and minds all the time. It's kind of, you know, annoying at this point, but it's true. You know, our stories are organizing tools and we all have one. You know, so we all have something to start from and something that can be kind of our guiding light in finding our purpose in social justice.
Right. And I believe that we all have like the freedom to create different pathways towards it. Like you said, it can look many different ways. And yeah, whatever you need it to be, whatever you can dream it to be, you could make that space. Mm-hmm. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Lucy.
Hello.
So Lucy runs a lovely bookstore. And typically when people think of bookstores, they think it's a place where, you know, you just go get your things and leave. But You and Me Bookstore has been doing something different. So I wanted to know about how you can think about, how we can look at bookstores as a place for community organizing.
I think I agree with everything that you've said. I think creating community is daunting and scary, I think, if you don't have it. I never had a great idea of community growing up, so how do you create that? But what community boils down to is a bunch of individuals caring about each other and wanting to hear about each other's stories. And the baseline of a bookstore is shelves full of worlds and stories, and it's a perfect conversation starter with someone. When I was creating the bookstore, I knew it had to be a cafe because if you're sipping something, you have to shut up and listen to what the other person's saying. And creating that kind of dynamic really offers a lot of openness and conversation. And I had no idea if I was gonna be able to create this community, but I knew I was able to connect with individual people. And I knew that if I could go to someone and change their world a little bit and ask them to change mine, that can snowball into something that we can later on call community. Yeah. And I feel so fortunate, you know, it's about 1 year and 3 months after opening up. I have a bunch of regulars that become really close friends of mine, and they always come in on a bad day. We actually have a secret whiskey shot under the bar for anytime someone like goes through a life situation. We've had about 15 people come in, they're like, I quit my job, and I was like, do you need the whiskey? And just that kind of like, you know, like you said, the living room environment and making people feel comfortable and open. And you can't get vulnerability on tap, but you can create a space where, you know, we can slowly build towards a vulnerable place.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How has it been to like create events or to just to curate that? Do you have like a team of people who are engaging with the people who come to your bookstore? Like, how do you foster that space too?
In terms of creating the events, it started off with just me. It was an employee of one, and I was also working a full-time job when I first started. And now we're super happy to be a team of 7, which is really exciting. Yeah. Thank you.
We love a team.
Thank you. I think with the events, it's the idea of it is both active and passive. So we have passive, wonderful type reading spaces, but it's a very small store. So we have the author go behind the bar, and it feels like everyone's crowding around the bar, and it feels like a very intimate experience. So even though it's a passive, like listening and reading kind of activity, the intimacy is there. And the active kind of events that we have, workshops, poetry workshops, we had a zine workshop, we have like just random, we have like feelings workshops, like, and just, you know, it's all donation based because we want to keep it accessible to everyone. And having the combination of the both really allows for us to be both participants in a space and also very active in that space as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I brought that up too because I mean, I would assume that it's really challenging or it's a lot to run a bookstore, but then also to create the programming to shape those spaces that go beyond someone just coming in and picking up a book is really important. And I know it takes a lot of thought and planning. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Yes. Steph is here representing for our youth and our writers. I personally believe, like having worked in education and still in that field, that youth, as corny as it sounds, youth are the future, right? But we have to take the time to coddle and foster and create those spaces where you all feel safe enough to dream and to use your writing in these ways. So I wanted to know, like, how do you think we can continue to introduce youth to writing and to using their writing in the ways that you use it?
The word that comes to mind when you ask that question is accessibility. Literacy, as we've like discussed, like today, literacy isn't accessible to everyone, and it wasn't to me for a while in the way that it should have been. So I think about like to respond to the question with another question, like what can we do to bring poetry to more young people, like so they know that it exists in this way as well, like that it can exist outside of like whiteness, that it can exist as, and it has existed for generations, for centuries, as a tool for liberation. Like how do we reframe what literacy and poetry means and make sure that it's able to reach like the people that need it, and make sure that like we're opening up spaces for young people from all sorts of different backgrounds and intersections and identities to have them know that their voices are necessary, are needed, are urgent, and also like make sure that they're provided with the tools, the support, and the love, and the care in all these spaces to make sure that they're able to do that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that too. I like that you said, I like that you mentioned accessibility too, because just in thinking about writing in the many forms that it can take, but poetry in general, like sometimes we learn poetry to be like this one thing, but then we hear we see spoken word poets, et cetera, just like really reshaping the way that we can think of writing. So, I mean, how do you create that, your space? How do you, like, what is, let me think about this question, because I just want to know, like, what informs the way that you show up on stage, who you are as a poet, what's shaping that?
I think intention, like who am I speaking to when I walk onto a stage? Like, who do I hope hears this message? Who do I hope is able to relate to this story and be inspired to share their own? And I think like that's something to be considered when like creating spaces for, safe spaces for poetry. Like what is the intention behind the space? Like who do we want to make sure we are loving and caring for in this space, and giving a voice to? That's something that I think about often, all the time. And I think that we should all be thinking about, like, in creating spaces, in creating art, Like, who are we here for?
Yeah. Intentions are important. Okay, so yeah, we're living in an interesting time, a crazy time, I would say, a highly polarizing time. There's book bans. We're talking about abortion. There's an election coming up. Pandemic, right, is still here. What is it like to be a thought leader and just a creator during this time? What does it feel like? What's been your experiences? Your time.
And we got these questions ahead of time too, and still hard. What is it like to be a creator right now? I think for many of us who, whether you consider yourself a creator or not, I think everyone is a creator in some way, but many of us who know so much about what's going on, the systems of oppression around us, the history, what make the current manifestations of xenophobia and bigotry the way that they are now. It's a daunting time because in some ways, and I know for me, 2020, like that summer, felt like the revolution was so close. And I want all of us who felt that in the room to just like take a second and sit with that. Because there is a grieving and a mourning, I think, that so many folks who that was their like first time, right, feeling like the revolution was close, because we know like it's happened before, that feeling of it being so close, like the 60s, so many other times for other folks. And what it means to come to a later part in the pandemic, and there's like a feeling of like the soil hardening back around us. And the feeling of losing that moment. That's hard to deal with. And then it's hard to, go back to our lives and go back to workplaces and go back into institutions that are trying to make us feel like none of that happened at all. I mean, that's the great gaslighting. So it's hard. I mean, it's really hard to create. It's hard to feel like you've said all you can say, and you've marched all you can march, and you've yelled all you can yell, and you've had the talking points and had the data. And it's, I don't know, is it stale now? I don't know what it is. But it's hard to create in this time. But, I think what keeps me going is just remembering that, we're just one sprout in a garden of wildflowers, and that even in this room, there are so many people who believe that we can get closer to liberation. That sustains me. Remembering our history, that, I was there's a green room downstairs, and seeing all the images of people like Josephine Baker and W.E.B. Du Bois, and of course, Arthur Schomburg, and so many others. We're in this space having discourse and talking about these things because of the little seeds that they left for us. And so, we're probably not going to see that liberation. We've heard it time and time again, liberation in our lifetimes. That's what we strive for. It probably isn't going to happen. But that doesn't mean it isn't worthwhile. And that doesn't mean that whatever little seeds that we throw out can't sprout into something that can operate as a path for future generations.
Thank you. I would love to hear your thoughts on this question too, but what you shared just reminds me of this Sonia Sanchez poem. It's called Catch the Fire. I mean, you talked about it as seed and just like scattering them with hope that they'll bloom and also passing those seeds to other people. But Sonia Sanchez also talks about in this poem about catching the fire. She's like, where's your fire? You gotta build it and pass it on. And it's like this active thing. Like 2020 set a fire for a lot of people. And though we might feel like it is fizzling in some ways, there's still people who are still passing that flame on. It's very important and exhausting work. But I think you're speaking to something that's very important. Like all of the people who have come before us have passed some kind of torch somewhere. And as long as we're passing it on, I believe that we're doing our communities a good justice. So yeah. What are your thoughts on it? What does it feel like to create during this time?
I'm just feeling everything that you just said. Wow, thank you for that. And you took some of the words right out of my mouth. Like there's such a flame burning in all of us. There is revolution burning in all of us. In this room and in this panel, there is still that fire burning. There is a light glowing out of all of us. And like for those of us like who got that flame and that light like during 2020, I think that is the revolution. No, I think that's at least part of it. The fact that we have that flame burning and that's been changed in us, like that is a powerful thing. And I think as artists, as creators, as people, leading with love at this time, I mean, I think about like just how to keep that flame going and pass it on to other people and keep that hope alive. And man, I'm speechless after that, thank you. But yeah, just keep that burning in all of us because it's still here and we are our own revolutions. Yeah.
What both of you have said is completely, it's so beautiful, and I feel that so deeply. I think that you want to lead with heart, you want to lead with action, but your heart is broken, and sometimes it's hard to figure out how to keep going. Earlier, when I first opened the store, we worked with an organization called Soar Over Hate. This was during the rise of anti-Asian hate crimes, especially against Asian women and femmes. And we worked together to give out free pepper spray. And we didn't know how many people would show up. And we gave out 1,200 pepper sprays that day. And there was a line 3 blocks deep. And I think it was a moment. It was a moment where people had to stop and be like, okay, I see you, I can't look away, and this is what we need right now. And we had that moment, and we still are having the issues that we are having now, and it hurts, and it continues to hurt. But sometimes it is those moments in which we come together and look out for each other in the ways that we need. It is that fire that you mentioned. It keeps burning. We're tired, we're hurt, but we keep burning on.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah. You're talking about tired, right? This work could be very heavy and difficult sometimes. And you have to want to do it. Like every morning you wake up, like sometimes, yes, it could be exhausting, but what is that thing in you that's like pulling you forward or pulling you in the direction towards the work? But I want to know about like some challenges and risks that you have taken in trying to create spaces for people who are marginalized. Challenges and risks.
I can start. It's easy to burn out. I think it's easy. I spent a lot of last year going and running on empty, and knowing that I had to keep going, and I really wanted to keep going, and I pushed and pushed and pushed, but at a certain point, I realized that I couldn't give in the ways that I wanted to anymore. And there are ways, I am still learning to do this, to take care of yourself and take care of the people around you, and also to let people take care of you, which is hard.
Yes.
But it's the challenges of doing that is overextending yourself, but building a community and having that baseline of a community and having individuals that care about you can help balance that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty burned out by the time the pandemic rolled around, and I'm probably only at like 50% back, just to be honest. But you know, I think the challenges have been, again, operating so often in institutions, and often being like a first or an only as a Black trans woman, and holding them accountable, right? I think especially, a lot of my work has been in the LGBTQ nonprofit industrial complex. If you know, you know, honey. And what has been interesting has been over the last several years, there's been such a like lifting of this rhetoric about particularly Black trans women, right? I know y'all been at the galas and wherever else where they're like, Black trans women are going through this and et cetera, and it's like, okay, well, what Black trans women work at your organization?
Ooh.
Have ever been on your board or even considered for your board?
Talk about it.
And not only that, what Black trans women are y'all serving? You know, and so it's a problem if we only show up in your rhetoric and your speeches and in your line items for grants and don't actually translate into shifts in material conditions for us. So that struggle has been difficult, that accountability part, right? The part of like showing them who they are and not who they claim to be publicly. So that struggle has been there. But I think on the other end of that, one of the greatest kind of things that has happened has been, and I don't know that most people know this, but so many Black trans people aren't waiting around to be saved and have never. We've created our own spaces and systems for ourselves to save ourselves, right? And so if you think of like historically a Crystal LaBeija and ballroom culture, like it's not just what you see on Legendary or in Pose or on Paris is Burning, but that is like literally a system to change the material conditions for Black and brown, queer and trans folks first and foremost. It's not just the spectacle. So that's important. But that energy lives on today. And through the pandemic, I actually saw so many Black trans-led initiatives move into a new space of power. And so you see Black trans-led organizations, like I was saying, Solutions Not Punishments Collaborative, but also like House of Tulip down in New Orleans, or you see Glitz Inc. led by Cayenne Dorshow, or, you know, there's a multitude, there's like, I call it a constellation of Black trans-led orgs and initiatives out there. And so I say all of that to say that, you know, there is merit to trying to shift these institutions, right? I know we want to have the constant reform versus abolition conversation. We can do that. But there's merit for that. And then there's merit and possibility in completely creating your own shit for your own people and not relying on the power structures that exist right now, right? So I just want to offer that people are doing that, collectives are doing that, and it is possible if that's what you believe.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I think the challenge is doing like the thing. Like it's hard work that we do. Like organizing work is hard. Creating art, like for organizing, it's hard. Like it's hard work. Like that is the challenge and that is the risk. Like against such powerful systems of oppression, like that is the risk. It is the challenge. But something that I say all the time is that, and I believe, and I have to remind myself often, that these institutions are strong, but we are so much stronger. So much stronger. That's just a constant reminder and something that I've been thinking about, like as I sit like in awe of everyone in this panel and all of the organizers that I work with, or rather that I'm in community with, that I love with. It's like these institutions are very, very strong. We're even stronger.
Right. I mean, we're the people who serve in those institutions. That's a huge risk, though. Like to go off on your own and try to create something that is outside of like the structural support systems. Risks are also money, right? Like who's funding it? Also, like how do you like galvanize a group? Everybody's so different. Everybody has different priorities and different needs too. The risk is what I'm doing actually gonna land? The people that I'm serving, like is it actually reaching them? So I just wanted to sprinkle that too. But yeah. We kind of already like hinted at this, but you had mentioned 2020 and just like what that felt like, fresh soil, good soil. And then now, like in the aftermath, it feels like the soil is hardening. And when we think about 2020 and all that has happened, it felt like that was the year of reckoning. We were about to step into something powerful. And then now 3 years later, we're having similar conversations and it seems like we're back to facing similar battles. So this question is maybe how have you or how do you wish to use your writing and your organizing to shape what comes next? Instead of having it happen to us, how can we use our writing and our organizing to shape what's to come?
I think 2020 also lit a fire within me. And if that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have opened up the bookstore. And I wouldn't have opened up something that I felt so strongly about, that I knew was something that the Asian American community needed. There's a bookstore desert in Chinatown. This is the first English language bookstore that they've had. And to create something like that, you know, we feel tired as well and we keep going, but that is change. And that is a seed. And looking forward, what does that mean for the next 5 years? How can we expand? I know that we're talking about book bans, we're talking about inaccessibility of books. So how can I as a bookstore push past just the circumference of the actual physical space? Something that I know that I've been working with is I worked a lot with the New York Public Library, and we ended up purchasing tens of thousands of books for kids in hospitals throughout the holidays. All diverse books, all written by writers of color. And the feedback that we got was they were never able to see themselves as kids in these stories before we were able to send those out. And I think even, you know, the physical act of doing that is me in a basement packing up these books and then taking a grandma cart to USPS and being like, I don't know where this is going. But to hear that from the kids and to hear that connection and to know that it's happening, and let's say, okay, it's happening at 15, 20 hospitals in New York City. That impact is there. That change is there. And to see yourself in a story, to see yourself in literature, and to create that spark at a young age, that's change too. And I have hope for that. I have hope that that's gonna continue and that's gonna, you know, when these kids grow up, they can pass that torch on. And like we talked about, so I wanna keep that hope alive too.
Yeah. Thanks, Lucy.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, what's going on?
I got so lost with everything you were saying in a beautiful way.
How can we use our writing and our community organizing to shape what's to come next?
Okay. You know, I think after, I hate that everything kind of hinges around the pandemic, right? Like the before time, the after time, or the during time. But I think before the pandemic, and really before I was deep in writing my memoir, everything was so external for me. Everything was about like, and I don't know if that's like, you know, before you turn 30 kind of thing, or, you know, everyone says that, Saturn's return, all that stuff. If you're going through it, good luck. But everything was so external. It was all about, well, what can I do to shift all of that? That I didn't really give enough grace and importance to the revolution inside me. And so now it's like, I just see things so differently. It's like, if I can work on calming this inside me and not stamping it down, right? But like organizing within myself, you know, my trauma, my history, my emotions, how I relate to the people closest to me, how I love, how I hold accountable, then there's no choice but for that to filter out into the work that I do and into the world, right? So I think, you know, we think so deeply about the macro, and I often think that it can be a shield for us to do the inner work that needs to happen. Because it all has to happen at the same time. It can't just be changing the world, because what's the point in changing the world and you're still holding all the difficult, disgusting, disrespectable things about yourself in a negative way, right? That it just doesn't work that way. It's all in tandem. So I say all of that to say that I think the role of my work is to continue to be a better person, to be selfish when necessary, because there is a beauty in creatives and artists being selfish sometimes and not only thinking about the audience and only thinking about whose gaze is on us. Like, I don't want to live like that no more, you know? Like, let me do some things just for me. And that can be liberation, you know? So, yeah, I think that's it. It's giving yourself grace and permission to create. And sometimes it doesn't mean that it has to have this concrete idea of what it will mean to everyone else.
Yes, permission. Nobody has to give you permission. Yes. I love that you said that. Yeah. Whew. Thank you for that.
Can you repeat the question again?
Yes. Before I repeat it, though, I really also like that you shifted it inward, because sometimes we think that all of this work it's all about your output, but then your input, like you are the person that's driving the work. You got to be good in order to be good for your community. So yes, the inward work is definitely important, and that's definitely like foundational to the external things that we can do for our communities. I like that, Raquel. Thank you. Stephanie, so the question is, oh gosh, what is the question? What's the question? How can you use your writing and your organizing to shape what's to come next?
So I think a lot about like collective. Like, I do not stand alone. Like, not ever, not in my writing, not in my organizing. Like, there are groups and groups of people that have made me who I am, that are the reason why I write, that are the reason why I fight. That rhyme. So I think a lot about like collective, and like I don't want to think about like just myself, like when answering this question, because like it's not just about like me, you know. You're gonna have to repeat the question one more time.
How can you use your writing to shape what's to come next?
Right. I think it's about like engaging with like the whole community, and like I think both things can exist at once, like looking inward and thinking about yourself and caring for yourself, and also like doing that like in community, you know, and that's something that I think about often. So of course, like I'll keep like writing and dreaming forward, and you know, like speaking the world that we all deserve to live in into existence. But like we've never done anything alone. So I think about just like continuing to bring people that I call, you know, chosen family into every space that I'm in, and making like writing and organizing, like the love that we share in those spaces, something that's widespread, because it takes everyone. So in short, what I want to do with my writing and organizing is share it, and have like every platform that I have be one that's not just my own. Because it's not about me, you know, it's about us. Yeah.
I just want to let y'all know y'all are doing great. They doing great, right? Y'all killing it. Y'all are doing a wonderful job.
We're doing great.
Thank you. I needed to hear that. So we're gonna wrap up soon, and we're gonna have a moment for Q&A. Very brief, but for the people in this room, I know that we're all coming from different walks of life. For the people in the audience who are writers, community organizers, or if something is blooming in them, do you have any advice for how they can get started or get connected, put themselves out there?
Just pick up the pen, put it to paper, and if it's bad, let it be bad. And if it's good, let it be good. I think just the act of doing is the scariest part, and getting over that activation energy and getting it out, then you'll let it flow.
Yeah, just do it.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Nike.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. Yeah, I think we often have a fear that it won't meet other people's standards. But who set those standards, honey? Like, you are your own person. Your standard is your own, you know, you're unique. So I agree, all of that. And I think what has also often helped me has been, hashing things out with other people, right? Like having those kind of like brain trust moments, right? Where it's like, I call up my black Southern mama, honey, from Florida. She from Florida, I'm from Georgia. And just ask her what she thinks about things, right? And, you know, some of the questions that I ask her, she's like, nobody ever asked me that, you know, and all of her almost, you know, she gonna hate me if she ever hear this, her almost 70 years. I think that those conversations, that connection can push you to continue to grow as well in your craft.
Got you.
Lead with love. Like, and that's something, it means something different, I feel like, every time that I think about it. It means something different for everyone. But like, I feel like if you lead with love and intention and all the work and all the writing and all the art that you do and that you make, you can't go wrong. You know, when your heart is in the right place and you're doing the things for the right reasons with the right people, when you're leading with love and intention, I think it's a small reminder, but something that I remind myself of.
Y'all taking notes? That was wonderful. I wanted to add something too. Oh, it doesn't matter if someone else is doing the same thing that you want to do too. Like, can't nobody do it like how you do it. If you're also feeling like somebody's already doing it, perhaps you can lean into that space where it's already happening, or, I mean, you can throw a little pizzazz on it and create something that has like a different angle to it. So I just wanted to add that in there too. What's next? Publications, book releases, events. How can we stay connected with y'all, and what should we be on the lookout for?
hella events for me. So many events. But I mean, also lying down, like a little bit of both. But I think just on the horizon, expanding past the community, and how do we make it bigger? And how do we make it real community? And in whatever forms that takes, either through events, through workshops, or anything, just brainstorming on that and letting myself kind of live that out a little bit.
Yeah. Where's the bookstore? Where can we pull up?
It's at 44 Mulberry Street. It's in Chinatown, Manhattan. Come, we have beer, wine, and coffee. So if you ever want to chat with me about book recommendations, I will talk your ear off. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy.
Go for it.
Okay, well, what is next? What an exquisite question. Who knows? You know, who really knows? Hey, that is all.
That's it. That's it. Yes. That's good enough.
I feel like you're open and accepting opportunities. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so I said this briefly, but I am finishing up my memoir, which will be out October 17th. It's called The Risk It Takes to Bloom. So all of those metaphors you heard, honey, that was like slow promo. It really wasn't slow promo. That came from my heart, but it probably sounds like slow promo now. But so doing that, I'm working with ACLU attorney Chase Strangio. I'm sure many of you may know, who does a lot of work around civil rights for trans folks, and a lot of the anti-trans legislation. We're doing Trans Week of Visibility and Action again this year. It's all digital, so look up trans_week on IG, and we'll have like a bunch of things out for the last week of March. And then I'm also working with iHeartMedia. We're launching an LGBTQ podcast network, and so I'm excited that we have a bunch of like LGBTQ creatives and voices who are going to be leading shows and telling their stories starting this year. So we'll be launching that in the next few weeks too, actually. So it's a little bit of a busy time, but there's a lot out there.
Yeah. Thank y'all. Y'all stay connected. We probably only have time for one question. I know. One question. Any burning question from the audience?
I can go. Hi.
Hi.
Over here. Hey, Steph.
I'm
hey,
like,
sis.
I can't see.
You're like, who's there? Hi, everybody. My name is Nico Diaz. I'm a queer Afro-Latinx poet from the Bronx and East Harlem. BX in the building, BX. Shout out to Josue, BX Writers. We host an open mic in the Bronx. And I also work at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. And one of the things I've been struck by is, as I've been immersing myself in poetry and really starting to do the work of organizing, getting in touch with my emotions as a man who was taught to like subdue that has been very revelatory. But particularly navigating rage in my day-to-day is useful because it provides focus in terms of how I need to respond to things, what is a threat, what isn't, but it's also exhausting. And so I guess another question is particularly for Raquel, as you've navigated being an activist for so long and challenging a lot of these different things. I'm sure the microaggressions that come up, it's like, how do you sustain your energy and not get burnt out or not get mired in the rage and just go kaput? Because I feel like sometimes I'm there a lot because it's just everything feels like an assault on my identity, even from people who are supposed to be allies in the poetry space.
Yeah. Wow. Well, first, I want to honor you for naming the rage. I mean, even the naming of emotions, like, is one of the hardest things, I think, for a lot of us to do, especially of color, so many different things. You got to have your circle. You got to have your circle of folks. I have my circle of folks who I can lean on when it gets really rough, who understand where I'm coming from. And I let them be my release, right? I don't let, you let them see all of it, all of you as much as you can, and don't feel obligated to, show all of you to the world. I mean, I think that is, I know that might sound weird to some folks, but being authentic and vulnerable in our work doesn't mean we have to give everything away to everyone. It's about being strategic about what's gonna keep you healthy and feeling, whole and full. So I think that is key. I know, there are so many barriers to therapy and mental health services. I know that. But, there are organizations out there that have resources. I think about like Fireweed Collective, which is led by queer and trans folks. They do like workshops and webinars about kind of managing the heaviness of the world in kind of a mental health space. There's also the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network. So there are resources out there, I think, around the mental health piece. So that is also key. And then I think it's about finding your releases and honoring, your releases. Look, I love a good massage. I love a good, I can't swim, child, so. I know, but I can't swim, but I love a dip in the water, so, complexity. Going to the park, going into our spaces where we can have joy and dance the night away, like all of that is important. Eating good food. If you got a friend who is always like, I want to bring you something, let them. Now, look, if it ain't good 1 or 2 times, give them a chance to like make it up if it's not good the first time. After that, maybe find another friend. But that's not personal at all. So, but I think all of that is key. I love a good video game. I'm a low-key gamer girl. And that is a release for me too. So I think it's about honoring our releases as well, because sometimes we have them, but we don't honor them, or we don't want to acknowledge them, or they feel like guilty pleasures or whatever. Don't feel guilty about things that give you pleasure. In general. Okay, I'm digging myself a hole. I hope that there was something in there. And look, if my lovely fellow panelists have things to share, please do.
I think you said it all, yeah.
She said everything.
Yeah, you said all the things.
Now, but to make a recommendation, I love the work of Adrienne Marie Brown. I'm sure a lot of y'all know Pleasure Activism. I love that book, and that also helped me a lot to rethink how I thought about self-care. So I suggest that as well.
Okay.
I'll say one thing. Surround yourself with really good friends, and surround yourself with people that believe in you when you don't, and let them help you. And it's like, let them love you too. And that changed my world. So, and it helps a lot.
Thank you.
Y'all, thank you so much. I wish we had time for more questions, but I just want to give a quick round of applause to our lovely panelists, Stephanie, Raquel, Lucy. Amazing. Thank you for dropping gems on us. And also shout out to Alejandro, who has curated such a lovely event. Thank y'all.
And give it up for your moderator one time, Brittany Barker, y'all. Amazing, for real, wow. All right, everybody, listen, we're gonna take a 5-minute break. All right, everybody. Please find your way to your seats, for I am about to start reading the bio of our keynote speaker, and then they're coming out. I'm gonna give y'all 30 seconds, all right? And I want y'all to, when I say the name of the speaker, I want y'all to give a lot of applause, show a lot of love. So be prepared for that. I see you. Y'all are with me. All right, everyone. It's time for your keynote speaker, Iris Morales. Come on. I know that's right. Iris Morales is a longtime activist, educator, and author whose work focuses on social justice. Currently, she is an advisory board member of the Instituto de Formación Política of Mi Gente, an organization for Latinx people seeking racial, economic, gender, and climate justice. As founding director of Red Sugarcane Press, she publishes books about the history and culture of Puerto Rican, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the Americas. Amazing. But there's more. Among others, Morales is an author of Through the Eyes of Rebel Women and Revising History's The Young Lord's Party, and anthologist of Latinas, Struggles, and Protests in the 21st Century USA, and Voices from Puerto Rico, post-Hurricane Maria. She's in conversation with Alejandro Heredia, who is not me. He is, you're gonna see us both in the same place at the same time. Alejandro Heredia is the community manager at PEN America and the creator of the summit. Can we get some love for that? Please welcome Alejandro Heredia and your keynote speaker, Iris Morales.
All right. All right. Hi, everyone. Wow. Thank you all so much for coming today. This event took a very, very long time to plan, and a lot of energy and a lot of people and a lot of love went into creating this space. So we're really, really excited to have you all. We're really excited to have Edith here gracing us with her presence. I'm gonna ask her a few questions. We're gonna have a brief conversation, sort of brief. And then we're gonna open it up to Q&A. We wanna create as much time as possible for you all to ask Edith any questions. So please start jotting those mental questions in your mind. Does that sound good? Yeah? Yes. Cool. All righty. How are you feeling, Edith?
Pretty good.
Yeah?
I want to say thank you to you. I have loved working with Alejandro. He has been so gracious, such a beautiful person. I met him in person today for the first time. I said to him I expected him to have a little more weight. But I have really felt it is an honor and a privilege to be invited, and I thank PEN America for the invitation. I really appreciate being part of a conversation that includes young people and a wide diversity of issues, and in particular the book banning, which is very important, and I will talk about it a little bit, but I wanted to thank you especially.
Yeah.
I did have a statement that I wanted to read,
Yes.
if it's okay.
Yes.
It is an honor to be here today, and I'd like to begin by reading this short statement, acknowledging that we are gathered in the ancestral land of the Lenni Lenape people, who were violently displaced by European colonialism, and to honor the generations of indigenous people who have lived and worked this land and who are still connected to it. I also acknowledge that Harlem has been home to African Americans since the early European colonization. It is also the birthplace of the Harlem Renaissance and a Black cultural mecca recognized throughout the world. The Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture is a leading institution documenting the lives and contribution of Afro-diasporic peoples from across the world. It is named after Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, who was born in Puerto Rico, a fellow Puerto Rican, who fought for racial justice and was active in the movement for the independence of Puerto Rico. I share these brief reflections to emphasize our interconnected histories and struggles. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's get into it. So I figured that we would start the conversation with the present. We're gonna go and talk about the past a little bit, and then we'll end on talking about the future and where we go from here. First, I wanna talk about Red Sugar Cane Press. Obviously you have a deep history of doing community organizing, and you've talked about how your work has sort of moved to incorporate media and writing as a tool to engage people. After all these years of community activism, what moved you to create Red Sugar Cane Press?
First, I want to say that I have been so deeply moved by the panels today. And I came away with a sense of, the work that I've done. I've been doing this work for a long time. But I came away with a sense of, I wish we could have an intergenerational conversation. I talk a lot with young people, but I often feel it's like a conversation sharing my history. But the panelists were so great. Thank you. The panelists today was so beautiful. They raised questions and insights that we need to be talking together to share our knowledge. I'm a lover of history, so I believe that we go from generation to generation, passing on our histories and our stories, and those are our traditions. And that leads me to your question, which is why Red Sugar Cane Press? Red Sugar Cane Press is actually a labor of love. It's a commitment to document the histories and culture of the Puerto Rican diaspora and people of color in the Americas. Because the Americas goes not just USA, but the Americas is the whole hemisphere. And so that's why you'll never see me say America. You hear me say US. And in my books, you'll always see that. I'm using this Kindle today because I want it to be cool. Because, I also have the paper notes. I said if the Kindle doesn't work, then I have my backup.
That's better.
But I said I'm going to be with young people, and I want to show that we all need to change. So you'll forgive me if I hesitate, when I stop here and there, because I'm still learning how to work this thing. So Red Sugar Cane Press, as I said, is a labor of love. And as I was thinking about it, one of the main principles that I put into the mission statement is that I wanted our publications to reflect the journey of indigenous and African peoples who, from enslavement to the present, have triumphed through the courage and tenacity of many generations. So that is part of our mission statement. And I wanted to, in creating the press, I wanted to create certain principles that it would live by. And I started thinking about people that inspired me, and there's too many people that inspire you. Just like when they asked me, what's your favorite book, I couldn't say because I'm inspired by so many books. But in our history, in Puerto Rican history, there were two people that stood out and that very much impressed me and influenced me with their ideas and the way they lived their lives. And you may or may not know them, but after I speak, you will know them. First, Luisa Capetillo. Luisa Capetillo, Puerto Ricans in the house. Luisa Capetillo was a labor organizer. She organized tobacco workers in Puerto Rico and in the United States in the early 1900s. She identified as a socialist. She was passionate about women's rights. She published a feminist treatise in 1911 and a total of 4 books on topics of women's rights and also topics of human liberation. What kind of a society do we want to create? Which is a question that I explore a lot in my work. You may know her, some of you may know her because in 1915, she was arrested in Cuba while she was traveling in Cuba for dressing as a man. She had a white man's suit, a hat, and she was arrested. It was scandalous for a woman to be walking down the street in pants. Now, the judge threw the case out because there was no law against a woman wearing pants. But then she got deported for her political ideas and her political organizing. Her ideas were visionary. I mean, she believed in free love. She didn't believe in marriage. She believed in nutrition. I mean, her ideas were visionary. But she remained buried in history. I said her work was in the 1900s. She remained buried until the 1970s when her works were reprinted. The second woman, and it's that inspired me, was Julia de Burgos, and more of you may know of her. She was raised in rural Puerto Rico. She was a teacher, a journalist, and a poet. And during the 1930s, she joined the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party to fight against US colonialism. And she headed up the women's section of the Nationalist Party. Her poetry, and I'm sure Urban Word alumni or students will know this, her poetry explored issues such as US colonialism, Blackness, feminism, love, migration. She is recognized as one of Puerto Rico's greatest poets. And she was a major influence on the Nuyorican 1960s literary movement. So those were my inspirations. And their lives and works, and I put those two together because oftentimes I get asked questions that separate literature from social justice. And you know, that is for some people, that works. That doesn't work for me. So my commitment is to document the histories and experiences of people of color, as I've already mentioned, to center the voices of working people and points of view that are not discussed in the mainstream. Because we're talking about banning books, it's not just the physical book, it's also the ideas that it contains. And the feminist ideas of Luisa Capetillo or the nationalist ideas of Julia de Burgos, those were scorned. And so we have to protect the ideas in addition to the physical embodiment. And lastly, last but not least, as they say, I seek to have the voices represented in Red Sugar Cane Press promote dialogue and inspire readers to also get involved in making change and changing the world for making it a better place. So with these ideas in mind, it was natural for me. The first publications were of Nuyorican poets and playwrights who were ignored by the mainstream publishing industry. Later, I put together an anthology of Latinas, contemporary Latina writers in the US, because I was looking for one and couldn't find one. And so I partnered with Canto Mundo, an organization of Latinx poets, to put together an anthology that now it exists where none existed, 40 women, Latinas, and it's used in college curriculums. Last, after Hurricane Maria destroyed Puerto Rico, or almost destroyed Puerto Rico, I felt compelled to go and do something. And I was able to go with a funders group. And the work that I saw that the Puerto Rican people and activists were doing for survival, totally abandoned by the US government. You will remember those pictures of Trump throwing whatever he threw, paper towels. I was so inspired by the people that I wanted to be able to support the efforts that were taking place. And so I gathered the voices of activists and artists who were creating mutual aid efforts and soup kitchens and distributing lamps and distributing solar panels so that I could compile an anthology, a bilingual anthology, to bring support to their efforts. And I continue to work with those organizations. And I present these as strategies. I think one of the panelists said it's a combination of both the writing and the doing. It's like, maybe it's not a sancocho, maybe something along the lines of, it's a mixed soup of things. And it's very important to see that there are different ways that you can use writing, and there are different ways that you can bring, in the real world. Today we're continuing to struggle to bring diversity to all the institutions of society, including the publishing industry. We have authors that are trying to diversify the types of publications, the types of jobs, all kinds of things. That's one set of strategies. And then we have the strategies, some of which we've heard today, of creating bookstores, of presses, production companies. And these are not either-or strategies. We have to do all of the strategies. When we're talking about human liberation, we have to do all of the strategies. I know sometimes within movements we get into fighting with one another of this strategy. I'm not much for the person that does organizing on electoral politics, but it is a strategy that we need today. We do need it today. But I'm not doing that one, but somebody else. Somebody else can do that one, and I'm not going to throw rocks at them when they do it, So I mention that because I think sometimes we get into this either-or mentality that works to our detriment, and it's part of our eating away at each other. Because as someone also said in the panel, we have to come from a place of love. That is the first place. Why do we do this work? Because we love our communities, because we love one another, because injustice cannot be loved. That's why we do this work. So we need all strategies to advance justice and freedom.
Yeah. Thank you. That was. Thank you. I want to skip ahead a little bit by skipping back and talking a little bit about the past. Many people know you for your work with the Young Lords Party, but even before then, you were already organizing in your community. So I'm just curious, what can you remember sort of what propelled you in this direction? How did it all start? Was it at home? Was it in school? How did you get into activism?
You know, the question of how one becomes an activist is like you try and pinpoint the moment, but the moment is bigger than you are.
Yeah.
So for me, I was very much influenced by the political energy and ideas of the 60s. I'm a child of the 60s. And so I was influenced by the fight against the war in Vietnam. I was influenced very greatly by the civil rights movement and by the voice of rebellious women. I was also influenced by my family circumstances. My mom and dad migrated from Puerto Rico, from rural Puerto Rico to the United States after World War II. My father was an elevator operator. My mom worked in the garment industry as a sewing machine operator. And we lived paycheck to paycheck, basically. So I had experience with poverty. Actually, the first activity that I got involved in was tenant organizing to fight for basic things like heat and hot water. And I was still in high school when I started to do that work. And I just loved organizing. I loved bringing information to people. They knew me already. They always, at that time I used to smoke cigarettes, and they'd have the cigarettes ready for me. And I also liked a drink that I don't know if it exists anymore called Yoo-hoo. Does it exist?
The
chocolate?
The chocolate drink? Yeah.
And when I would come, they would say, "Nena, ahí está los cigarrillos." They would say, "The cigarettes are there, and the chocolate drink is there for you."
That is so badass.
So, but I loved working with the community and bringing information, empowering. And at that point, because we're not born revolutionaries in a capitalist society, that is the other thing, that there's a misnomer. It's a process that we go through as we gain experience with what we're doing. And so at that point, I thought that, the problems that we faced as a people was because we didn't know how to navigate the system, and we couldn't speak English. And as, a young woman who could speak English, I was relied upon, so dile a la nena que venga a leer la carta, have the young girl come and read the letter for me. So I became a person that people counted on, and all immigrant communities have that experience, that the older children that learn English, whether it's Spanish or any other language, become the ones that, take kind of leadership in the community as a practical matter. It's not that you're thinking and saying, maybe today I will get up and go and become an activist. Well, let me look at up professions. Right? So it came from my heart, and that's what I was thinking at that time. And then I went to City College, and that's a whole other story, which I won't get into right now. And there I became a student organizer. So from a tenant organizer, I knew you bring people together in kinds of how you develop demands and things, and organize rent strikes, et cetera. I went to City College and got involved with making demands for Black and Puerto Rican studies. You all take it for granted. It didn't exist. It didn't exist. Some of my young people here today said they were tired. I was thinking, wow, I'm getting tired too. But we can't. We take our time, rest a little bit, and then get back up and, back into it. Think of our ancestors. I always start from colonialism and slavery. That's my starting point of where my struggle began. It actually began before, but in the Americas, let's say, that's where it began. I'm going to say like the young people say, what was your question again?
No, you answered it. It was about how you got it. The question was about how you got into organizing, but I think you answered it. You answered it. I also I wanted to ask about sort of the Young Lords Party and your work in helping to create the Women's Caucus. I'm just curious to hear you talk about some of the conditions and experiences that led you to create the Women's Caucus within the party.
Okay, I even forgot in my activist experience to mention that I joined the Young Lords.
Remember that?
Well, I already had this organizing experience when I joined the Young Lords, and I should say that, you know, it felt to me like it was where I needed to be next. You know, to fight for the rights of Puerto Ricans, to return back to the community after college, to return back to the community and fight for the rights of Puerto Ricans and for the decolonization of Puerto Rico. That felt to me like that was the right place for me to bring what I had learned and what my practice had been. And as I said, I was already in love with the community. So this felt like a good place for me to be. So I joined the Young Lords, and I'd like to mention that most of the Young Lords were first generation born or raised in this country. And that at the time, I would say we were between 16 and 24 years old. So probably younger than a lot of people in the audience. So what happened during the 60s was rather extraordinary because young people of that age were committed to changing society. And not only in the United States, this was a worldwide movement. So we have these historical periods, like I always say, I'm glad I was part of two revolutionary changes. You know, the 60s and then Black Lives Matter. I said, so thank you for allowing me to have that spread of life. So obviously with that, my background, when I joined the Young Lords, I expected revolutionary position on women. You've all had that experience. And so, you know, but misogyny, sexism, gender discrimination that was prevalent in US society was alive and well in the Young Lords. I always mention that it was prevalent in US society because sometimes they say, oh, you know, those Latin men are machista. Like, and I say, well, the other men too, you know?
That's true.
Because it's almost like, people trying to push it off like it's just an individual problem. Or an individual problem of a certain race or a certain ethnicity.
That becomes racialized, and then it's used as a tool to then discriminate against those people. Yeah.
Exactly. And we never felt, you know, one of the contradictions that we had with the white women's movement at the time was we never felt that our men were our enemies. We never said they are the enemy. We said they need a whole lot of political education. And I was in charge of political education. Well, not in charge, together with other people. But I had a strong influence there, let's put it that way. I don't want anybody to get mad at me. 50 years later. So, obviously, we were facing sexism and we were facing, misogynist practices and attitudes. And so a group of women got together and formed a women's caucus to fight male supremacist ideas and practices. And we felt that it was necessary. We did a lot of different things, but we felt it was necessary to study. And I raise that also because more recently I've been getting requests to help with political education. And sometimes organizations say, oh, we do a big annual political education event. And I say, an annual event? I said, we did political education every week. It was required. And we also did political education in the community every week. And it wasn't a dumbed down version. It wasn't one of these dummies, what is it called? Readers for Dummies or something? Yeah. It wasn't one of those books. It was, based on the 13-point program, which started with, we want liberation for Puerto Ricans in the United States and in Puerto Rico. And it ended with, we want a socialist society. And in between, we talked about, the equality of women, the liberation of the fight against racism, the liberation of all third world people, down with the capitalist traders. I don't talk about that one too much. But study was very important, and so we studied what was available because there wasn't a whole lot of stuff available on, especially there was very little available. I told you that Luisa Capetillo was buried. We knew a little bit about her, but not too much. And but we studied Black feminist tradition. That was really our major influence. And the other thing that was important with study was practice, right? Because otherwise you become armchair revolutionaries, or you become academics.
Wow. Wow. I like that. Was a good one. That was good. That was good. That was good.
Please forgive me, not all academics. Not all academics are armchair revolutionaries. We have tremendous academics. We need academics. We need academics. What we don't need are the academics that are not connected to the community.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That sell books on our history, but don't do a thing. So we worked in collaboration with other women because the women in the Young Lords were really part of a feminist of color movement that was developing at the time. So we worked with the women of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Black Panther Party, Third World Women's Alliance, Chicanas in the Brown Berets, Asian Women in Iwakun. And so we collaborated on different projects, campaigns like sterilization abuse, trying to end sterilization abuse and gender violence, issues of which don't get talked about a lot, issues of discrimination and conditions for women of color in the workplace. In my recent book, Revisiting Histories, I decided to lift up the Health Revolutionary Unity Movement, which was an organization of hospital workers. And hospital workers at the time were 80% women and women of color. And so when the Lincoln Hospital takeover took place, it could not have happened without the foundational work that the women of Atrum had developed. And so if you read their program, it's very interesting because they talk about the intersectionality of working conditions and sexism within their program. And these are the things that I wish academics would explore. And in this, in my recent book, what I try and do is open some windows to areas of study of women of color and Puerto Rican women and movements that have not been researched and that I wish people would research. But in any event, we started to make demands on internally because our changes are internal and external, and that was also referred to in the panels today. And yes, there's a dialectical relationship. You can't change society. One of the sisters today said, you know, you can't change society and then be walking around. You can't change society unless you change yourself. What kind of a society? The question we have to ask is, what kind of society? If you're a mean, racist person and you think you're changing institutions, you're not changing anything for the better for anybody. So it's a dialectical relationship. It's not like sometimes people say, I'm going to change myself, and I imagine them trying to sit for 3 or 4 or 5, 10 years changing themselves and then coming out and saying, now I'm going to be an activist. No, it's a dialectical relationship. In the course of struggle, you change. And in the course of studying and struggling, you change. Because once you learn about your history and your culture, nobody can take that from you. So then it's your choice. Do you want to live according to what because it's not easy, as everybody said. And to live a long life following those principles, it's not easy. But there ain't no other way if we're going to be free, right? So I know you want me to talk a little bit more about the women, right? You want to know how we...
Yeah, how's the...
You want to hear about the... So we started to make demands, and because the big debate at that time was, should the liberation of women and liberation of women of color in particular be part of the social justice agenda, or should we wait till after the revolution? Wow. Ooh. That's the truth. That was the big debate. And so obviously the Black feminist tradition said, hey, how we deal with this situation and this issue today is going to reflect what kind of a society we have, which is exactly what has happened. You can read about the struggles of anti-colonial struggles and women struggling within those movements. And then after the colonialists were thrown out, the position of women went back to what it was. So that's why my conclusion is gender and racial justice have to be part of every single movement, book banning and everything else.
No, I love that.
But this idea of what comes first is also hierarchical idea, which is problematic. What's problematic?
Wait your turn.
And what?
Wait your turn. You gotta wait your turn to be liberated.
Yes, you gotta wait your turn, but also this is more important than that, right? It's like when I was a little girl and I would say to my mother, why do boys get to do this and not that? And not girls, So I guess I was a feminist from very early on. But in battling this idea, sometimes you will see in movements the ideas change shape. It's the same idea. It's racism, but now it's got a different shape to it. And it takes a while to be in a political struggle to recognize this shape shifting that takes place. We don't always recognize it. I don't want to give you the impression today that what I'm saying today, I understood in 1970. This was a process. And so in this book, I'm giving my process, and I'm saying we start in one place and we develop and we grow. And some of these ideas are so that we can recognize what is happening, because we're not always taught to think critically about these things. So the first idea that was thrown at us in the 13-point program, we loved the 13-point program because it had everything in there. Liberation for everybody. And then it said equality for women and revolutionary machismo. So we didn't fight it at first because we were happy to see equality for women. None of the other revolutionary nationalist programs at the time even mentioned women. So we were happy to see, but we started thinking about it. What the hell is revolutionary machismo? Is that, can you say revolutionary racism? Would anybody here say revolutionary racism? You know, it's what they call an oxymoron. So we realized that really that was a resistance. Now remember, this program that we loved, the 13-point program, was written by 19 and 20-year-old men, Latino men. What did they know about women's oppression? So we have to keep that in perspective, but we were in the battle of ideas, you know, and young people are always at the forefront of revolution. But we were in the battle of ideas because ideas have consequences, and that is what book banning is about. You know, we talk about book bannings kind of with a little separation, like it's a physical object, but what are the ideas behind the book banning? The ideas behind this book banning is white supremacy, it's deep schisms in our society. And that's what this is about. And that's why this is a battle that we should care about, because it's about promoting white supremacy, racism, anti-gender, everything, a refusal to change, a society that needs to be changed. And then we need to build a grassroots movement based on that understanding and educate people what censorship means and what it means for people of color and working people. What is it that we're really talking about, right? And there's a veneer that's trying to be placed there, but we've got to take these issues head on, I believe. So anyway, this first idea was this revolutionary machismo. We realized that basically it was like, we're anti-colonialism, we're anti-imperialist, we're anti-racism, but somehow we can't really get to say we're anti-patriarchal, right? Although the word did exist at the time. It wasn't that the word didn't exist, because sometimes you say, oh, come on, sister, those weren't words we used at that time. So I looked it up.
I love that. Gotta hit him with the dictionary. It's like
So we struggled against that idea and began to talk about the revolution within the revolution. Okay, so we're gonna say it's, it has to take place now. You're saying secondary, we're saying now. And then they came up with something else that said, we have to deal with, they said, yeah, men are macho. They admit it. we have macho things we do. But the sisters let us get away with it. Ooh. Can you imagine? And I documented, it's written. You can look it up in the Palante newspaper, which I did. So that was a shape-shifting, right? A shape-shifting that I was talking about, how ideas change form. It was the same idea, but now it was a different form. And it said, women are passive. They allow us to get away with this. And then we had to struggle against that. So we struggled against many things. We organized with women of color on many different campaigns that were important. The other thing that is important to note is that sometimes when we talk about women, it's like reproductive rights. Like, okay, that's your box. And our position, and my position, is that wherever a woman stands and faces injustice, it's a woman's issue. Right? So, but frankly, it took many years for me myself to understand that. Because for many years, people said, why don't you write more about the women and the young lords? And I said, well, what do I write? Our experience was the same experience, right? And then realizing, yes, but the eyes and the weight of it, how it felt on our bodies, how it felt on our minds, how it felt in terms of where we could move and not move, and even how it felt in terms of how the police dealt with us, were different experiences. And so then if it's anybody that's everybody's a photographer today, but you all know that you can choose to point the camera here or there or here. And so you could do the same thing in literature. And so that's what I try and do in this book. Did you want to know more?
No, that was perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Like, I wanna end on, because I do want to give at least 10, 15 minutes for questions from the audience. I want to end on this idea of literary activism. You were just talking about ideas and how important they are, and for the last 3 years, at 3.5 years almost at Pan America, we have been working really, really hard to create, to sort of tease out questions around this idea of literary activism. What does that mean? What are the limits and the powers of the written and spoken word? And so I'm curious, when you hear the term literary activism, what does that mean to you? What comes to mind?
Well, I think I already made reference to it. I don't separate the literary and the activism. It's like, to me, literary activism goes together. Otherwise, you can call literary something else. It doesn't have to be activist. But I think that the combination of literature and activism, it's an intersectional idea that cannot be separated. And it means that we're using works of literature, which we also have to define at different times. Literature is different things. I mean, in the days of Luisa Capetillo and also Julia de Burgos, the only outlets for their writing were newspapers. And so that was the literature that's where they first were able to publish their poems or their literary essays. So, but I see it as interconnected. It's a particular form of activism that says we're interested in making social change, bringing a more humane understanding of the world and the contradictions that we live in through literature. And that's how I see it. And I think that we learn from the past. In preparing for this, I was thinking about we're talking about book banning, about the the struggle in, 13 years ago, when they banned the Mexican American Studies program in Tucson, Arizona. And then people had to mobilize to fight against that. And they brought lawsuits, teachers mobilized, students protested, did walkouts, did pickets. And one of my favorite things was the caravan. I keep thinking, maybe we could start a caravan of banned books.
Yeah.
This was banned Mexican Chicano books, and they traveled on that caravan to cities across Arizona and I believe Texas. And authors participated to do readings and to talk to students and the community and to educate. Well, eventually, they won the case. It was found that the disbanding of the program and the banning of books that occurred with it was unconstitutional, and that it was based in racial animus. And those are legal terms, but they won the lawsuit. It took 7 years. So then I thought, fast forward, and we're here in Florida, and we're in a panic like Florida, when there are 18 additional states. And what to me this highlights is that we need to build solidarity among people of color, Mexican, Puerto Rican, African American, Caribbean, gays, poor people, we need to build coalitions and solidarity and all strategies and tactics to really move us forward, because this is not an issue that is going to be resolved by an election. So.
Thank you. Yeah, that's perfect. All right. We're running a little bit behind on time, so we have time maybe for 1 or 2 questions, if you can make it very, very quick. Any burning questions that you want to ask? If you have a question, you can just walk up to the mic in the back, I believe.
If there are no questions,
If there's no questions, that's okay.
Yeah.
I just want to signal that Edith is going to be doing a book signing right outside here. A lot of you got free copies of her newest book, which is really, really exciting. So if you want to get your book signed and also talk to Edith, please go ahead and do that. Can we give a round of applause to Edith Morales? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. You did good.
Get her signed book. We're going to bring her out. Edith?